Please do so. I'm going to forget every time. So if somebody could just kind of keep in mind to remind me, that would be truly helpful. Please get a piece of paper and a pencil for this theoretical framework. It's very important. We will not do too much without a theoretical framework, so I need you guys to understand that. You don't have to get everything now, but I want you guys to start familiarizing yourselves with these frameworks, okay? So the theory that we're dealing with for this lecture is African American male theory, right? The framework posits African American boys and men are resilient and resistant. African American male theory posits that African American boys and men are born with an innate desire for self-determination and with an unlimited capacity for morality and intelligence. Now, this framework it derives from the chair of our department, Dr. Nana Lawson Bush, who specializes in research, development, and cultivation of African men and boys. But for me, I like to expand this framework beyond just men and boys, right? I look at this as applicable to African women and African girls, okay? But what becomes important for you is the resilience and the resistance, okay? Also, the innate desire for self-determination and the unlimited capacity for morality and intelligence. That's the core of this framework that I want you to walk away with, right? We know African people are resilient. We know African people are resistant. And they're born with an innate desire to be self-determined and with an unlimited capacity for morality and intelligence. That's what I really want you guys to understand from this framework, okay? Myself personally, I am not a Christian. Was raised in a Christian home. Was raised reading the Bible, but I don't ascribe to that. I lean more towards the African spiritual traditions, right? But in the Bible, it says, while God was creating the world, creating man in particular, let us make man in our image after our likeness, okay? Let us make man in our image after our likeness. This is what it says in the Bible. This is God talking. Historically, scientifically, archaeologically, it cannot be argued or refuted that the African people are the first people on this planet. Again, scientifically, historically, archaeologically, cannot be argued that African people are the first people on that planet. No one can dispute that, right? So let me ask you guys this. If science, history, and archaeology tells us that African people were the first people on the planet, the Bible says, let us make man in our image, after our likeness. What does that mean? So think about it. We know that African people are the first people on the planet, right? God is saying, I'm going to create man, human beings, in my image after my likeness. What is that saying?
God is a black man, or African in nature,
Yep.
black in nature.
Yep, absolutely. So if we are to take what the Bible says as truth, right? If we are to take what history, science, and archaeology says as truth, and merge those two truths together, we could argue that this image, this deity, this entity, this force, this spirit that we call God is African, right? But here's what's interesting. African people themselves never depicted God in a human form, right? So for the ancient Comedics, at a point, when they depicted God, the sun was used, right? Because it's a force, it's an energy, right? But if you are to take the Bible and history, one can argue God is black. So let's look at the first human ancestor, found in Africa, right? Most famously known as Lucy, but we want to give her an African name as she's an African being, so we call her Abiomi. We'll look at a quick timeline of African evolution and migration. So we know Lucy, or Abiomi, was located in Ethiopia. Her remains trace back about 3.2 million years, right? The further that they researched, the further they digged, they found bones that could be traced back in Africa 7 million years old. Even more research has produced that African people can be traced back 8 million years old. So if I were to ask you how old are African people, there's three acceptable answers: 7 million years old, 8 million years old, or unknown. Unknown is acceptable because the more that they dig, the more that they excavate, older African people become, right? So we really don't know. Modern human, the Homo sapien, that was found, the remains of that was found to be traced back to East Africa some 200,000 years ago. But further research states that that could actually be traced back 340,000 years ago to the Cameroon. So the first large-scale migration outside of Africa could be traced back 60,000 years. And then the first modern European can be traced back 30,000 years. So this notion of diaspora, again, does not start with the system of enslavement. It can be traced back 60,000 years to just Africans moving and migrating outside of the continent of Africa. Here's a physical representation of the same information. So we know 7 to 8 million years old, the humanoid out of Africa. Modern humans, Homo sapiens, can be traced back 300,000 years. Large movement outside of the continent of Africa, 60,000 years. And finally, the first European comes on the scene, 30,000 years. Why is that important? This becomes important because it ties to this notion of history, right? Oftentimes, Africans in America want to trace our history back to that 30,000 year experience when Europeans came onto the scene, right? And what that does, it forecloses or ignores the 8 million year history that we were on this planet doing things and actuating, right? So if I offered you $30,000 and I put that on the table, then I put $8 million on the table, everybody's going to take that $8 million. But through our schooling, we have been conditioned as Black folks to only focus on that $30,000, which doesn't make sense, right? So African individuals prior to European contact. This is one of those individuals, Narmer. And this kind of along the lines of Jelani, what he was saying as far as the ancient Comedic pharaohs. We know in this class, when I say Kemet, I'm referring to Egypt. We know that Kemet is the original name for Egypt. Kemet literally means land of the blacks or black land, right? So Narmer was an ancient Kemetic pharaoh of the early dynastic period. Some consider him the unifier of Kemet and founder of the first dynasty, therefore the first pharaoh of unified Kemet. And when I say the unifier of Kemet, Kemet was bifurcated in two sections, Upper Kemet and Lower Kemet. Narmer was able to bring those two together to form one nation state. This is an individual, but before I get into that, is anybody in the medical field or looking to go into the medical field in this class? No? Okay. Is anybody familiar with the Hippocratic Oath? Go ahead and speak up because I can't see the chat. It's going to like mess up the whole thing. So if you got something to say, you could just shout it out.
I just called me for when you asked about the medical field.
Okay.
Me too.
So have you guys heard of
Do you know harm? I believe it is the Hippocratic Oath.
Speak on that, Serena. What is the Hippocratic Oath?
First, do you know harm? When you go to medical school, I imagine. I'm not sure about that, though.
Yeah, so you're right. Do you know who the Hippocratic Oath is named after?
Hippocrates,
Yep.
The Greek.
Yep, absolutely. So the Hippocratic Oath is named after Hippocrates, the Greek. He's widely recognized in the West as the father of medicine, okay? Who you're looking at is the real father of medicine, Imhotep, which Jelani had mentioned earlier. Imhotep was a bad man. He was probably the most brilliant individual to walk this planet, right? Imhotep was the world's first multi-genius. He was the world's first architect, first physician, first engineer. He built Egypt's first pyramids and is the architect of the Step Pyramid. He is also recognized as a priest, sage, poet, scribe, and astrologer. Check this out, though. As a physician, He diagnosed and treated over 200 diseases, 15 of the abdomen, 11 of the bladder, 10 of the rectum, 29 of the eyes, and 18 of the skin, nails, and tongue. He also performed surgeries and practiced some... One second, y'all. I'm sorry, hold on 1 second. Let me let her in. Just want to make sure Destiny gets in. All right, bet. Okay. All right. Are you serious? Fuck. All right. He also performed surgeries and practiced some dentistry. So all the aforementioned, right? All of this occurred over 2,200 years before the Western father of medicine, Hippocrates, was born, right? So not before he started practicing medicine, not before his first surgery, not before he died. This is before Hippocrates was even born, right? So how is it if Imhotep did all of this before Hippocrates was even thought about? We recognize Hippocrates as the father of medicine. We know nothing except Jelani of Imhotep, right? About 100 years after his death, he was elevated to a medical demigod and later to a full god some 2,000 years after his death. He was also worshipped by the early Christians as either the first Christ or as one with Christ. So in Christianity, right, we recognize Jesus as the Christ. So what they're saying is, in early Christianity, instead of worshiping Jesus as the Christ or viewing Jesus as the Christ, Imhotep was recognized as the Christ. It's another individual I believe Jelani mentioned as well, Akhenaten and his mother Queen T, because you cannot have the excellence of African civilization without the African woman. Shit, none of us would be here if it was not for the African women. So Bhagnatan. Bhagnatan was the pharaoh of the 18th dynasty of Kemet, who ruled for 17 years and died perhaps 1336 BCE or 1334 BCE. He is especially noted for abandoning traditional Comedic polytheism and introducing worship centered on the Aten. So he's shifted Kemet from a polytheistic, the worship of many gods, to a monotheistic, the worship of one god, which is Aten, right? Akhenaten lived at the peak of Kemec's imperial glory. Kemet has never been richer, more powerful, or more secure. He's a great military strategist and genius, Taharka. It's clear from historical accounts that Taharka was one of the greatest ancient Comedic pharaohs. Taharka was described by the ancient Greek historian Strabo as having advanced as far as Europe, and even as far as the Pillars of Hercules in Spain. This feat alone would count him among the greatest military tacticians in the Asian world. Later, Spanish legendary chronicles also identified Tarko as general of an Ethiopian army that supposedly campaigned in Spain in the 17th century BCE before his becoming pharaoh. This event has also been held to account for the name of the Spanish city Tarco, now called Targonia. So he has a city named after him in Spain. The third bullet point gives you some biblical references of Taharka. So we have here, in our society, we have Jeff Bezos, we have Elon Musk as some of the wealthiest people. Both of them together don't have shit on this man here. Mansa Musa, the wealthiest man to walk the planet ever. Still to this day. Musa the First, commonly referred to as Mansa Musa, was the 10th Mansa, which translates as King of Kings. Musa embarked upon a large building program, raising mosques and schools and colleges. Most famously, the ancient city of learning, the University of Sandgar, was constructed during his reign. at the height of his power, Mali had at least 400 cities. And this is the exact same information that Christian bestowed upon us. But what's crazy about Mansa Musa, right? His wealth is estimated to be $400 billion. Not M, but $billion. As legend has it, when he would go on his travels, his caravan would have so much gold that the gold would spill over into the cities that he's traveling through and would change the economy of the city. So there would be the equivalent of him traveling through East LA on the 10 freeway headed west, right? His caravan drops some gold, and so much gold is dropped that the whole economy of Alhambra is shifted because that's how much gold lands in the city. That's how much wealth this individual had. These are some images of some Moors. Moors are from this area of Mali. Their culture originated in this area of Mali, and they migrated up north into what we now call Morocco. But what they would end up doing is crossing that small body of water into Spain. And at this time, Europe is going through the Dark Ages, right? So we have pestilence, we have cannibalism, we have very cold, adverse weather, right? The Moors came in and brought them enlightenment. Explained to them that you don't want to have your animals where you sleep. Put them outside in the barn, right? You don't want to take a shit where you sleep. We're going to give you plumbing systems so you can have your areas be clean, right? Instructing them on how to bathe. This is literal historical fact. The Moors came in and gave the Europeans the science of bathing, right? They brought them the science of when it's cold, wear heavier clothes material. When it's hot, wear lighter clothes material. So how to dress for the seasons. Silks was brought into Europe by the Moors. Spices was brought into Europe by the Moors. So there's heavy African influence in Europe that does not get talked about. If you look at this picture on the bottom of the Moor on the horse, if you look in the background, there's an arched doorway, right? Those arched doorways is a Moorish archaeological signature, right? Before them, it was only the square doorways. Any type of arched doorway, that's something that is embodied by Moorish science. Again, we cannot talk about the excellence of Africa or the excellence of civilization as a whole without acknowledging the African woman. Center screen is Makeda. She was responsible for the lineage that would lead to Haile Selassie. On upper left-hand side of your screen, that is Aset. Aset serves as, so in Christian theology, you understand the trinity of Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. That is derived from African spiritual science. The original story is told from Aset, who you see up in your upper left, Asar, and Haru. Haru would play the image of Jesus. Asar would be like the Joseph or God figure, and then Aset would serve as Mary. Below Aset, we have the goddess Ma'at. The goddess Ma'at embodies the principles truth, justice, harmony, balance, order, reciprocity, and propriety. This was the moral order of the Comedic society, and we'll read more about this in the next, I want to say 2 weeks. We'll start to get into that reading. To your upper right-hand side, this is an image of a statue of an African queen. I believe this is Nefertari. You can't see it, but this is a doorway to a temple. On the other side is a pillar which stands her husband. And what's significant about this, the dimensions of Nefertari are exactly the same as the dimensions of her husband. This is done on purpose to show that there's equal grounds between women and men as it pertains to rulership, right? So women would be able to rule with the same authority, the same power, and oftentimes with more military might than the men would. In fact, this speaks to the woman on the bottom right of our screen, Yaa Asantewaa. She's from the area of Ghana, which we now call Ghana, but was originally called the Akan Kingdom. And she engaged in decades-long wars to stop the British invasion of West Africa. This is an image of Africa prior to European invasion. So before colonialism, before the Berlin Conference, this is how Africa was organized, right? And these are some of the nation states that you see in the pre-colonial Africa. So you know that Kush is what we now call Ethiopia. We know that Kemet is what is now called Egypt. As I mentioned, Akan, that's on the west coast of Africa where Ghana is. And then next to that is Ife, right? What's interesting about the Akan region and the Ife region is Akan would end up turning into Ghana, but in the region of Ghana, there's a spiritual tradition called the Akan, right? Just like Ife would turn into Nigeria, in the Nigeria region, there's a spiritual tradition called Ifa. So you see how these things kind of evolve, but they still try to maintain and remain their essence. So these are some images of the Comedic mystery schools. This is where you would go to receive your learning. If you look on the image for on your bottom right-hand side, you see these pillars. You can't really see what's inscribed on the pillars, but what is inscribed on the pillars is mathematical computations to understand math, understand science, and understand astrology. So what was important about Comedic society, everything was done with a twofold purpose. One, for supreme beauty and the aesthetic, and two, for pedagogy, for you to learn from, right? And these pillars were no different. These Comedic individuals were very in tune with nature, in tune with astrology. In fact, they seek to replicate what they saw in nature in their world and in their society. So when the pyramids were constructed, they were in alignment with the stars, right? And we'll watch a quick video that goes into this in a little bit more detail.
Restore what? Now you can see all three pyramids. Now in the further back is the pyramid of Khufu, Kufra, and Menkaure. Keep in mind, brothers and sisters, that our ancestors had astronomical science, astrology, where they studied the stars and so forth. One of the things that's been brought to astronomers' attention is that they noticed that the pyramid of Khufu and Kufra, if you notice right here, are in a perfect alignment. Okay? It's a perfect alignment. But the question is that why would such a perfect alignment and perfect structure would they build the small pyramid of Menkaure off course? Can you see it off course? Yeah. But what they found, though, is that our ancestors were building the pyramids in alignment with the stars, that they were in rhythm with the astrology and the astronomical science of the universe, science of astrology or the study of the stars. And what they found is that the star system Orion was the star system of Osiris. Remember, the king wants to become one with Osiris. So by aligning the pyramid of Khufu, Kufra, and Menkaure with Orion, and that's why they built the pyramid of Menkaure slightly over and not in alignment, because the pyramids were built off the alignment of the star system Orion. The star system Ceres was Isis. So our ancestors, in essence, were building heaven on earth. They were taking the science of the stars and building the pyramids exactly as they saw the heavenly body, or the cosmological universe. Figure out why Menkaure's pyramid was not in a perfect alignment, but it fits with the alignment of the star system Orion. As well as the other pyramid layout, it fits into the constellation that our ancestors saw of Osiris. And that is the constellation of the man that we have today, as a figure of a man. So you can take and put the star system Orion right over the pyramid of Khufu, Kufra, and Menkaure, and see why they had the alignment of Menkaure slightly over, because it fit with the star system Orion, because the purpose was for the soul to ascend into heaven, for the spirit to ascend into heaven, to become one with Osiris. And the star system Orion was connected with Osiris. Keep in mind that the star system Orion was aligned perfectly with the chambers of the pyramids that we're going to deal with later on in our lecture series when we get into it. So this is serious knowledge to show you how profound our ancestors saw that they were building and with the constellation of the universe. Tomorrow when you go into Saqqara, you're also going to see the pyramid of Unas, showing the first concept of ascension into heaven. Long before there was Christianity, long before there were little white angels with wings under, that we get a concept that we're going to go to heaven, Unas already had the concept of ascension into heaven, or a spirit going into heaven, known as astrotheology. So this is what our ancestors saw, the soul becoming one with the great god Osiris in the constellation of Orion, which was the symbol for Osiris. and the star system Ceres was for Isis. Powerful astronomical knowledge that our ancestors had, showing how in tune our ancestors were with the heavenly bodies. In essence, building heaven on earth. Even in the Hermetic text, it speaks of Asar is our father in heaven. And he looked down on his kingdom that he built. Hold this before me. So let me show you something here. This is the kingdom. This is Asar in Orion's belt now. See Asar in Orion's belt, looking down on his kingdom? In Amos in the Bible, it speaks of, seek of him who is of the star, the 7 stars of Orion. Now, let me lay something on you. Our Father, which art in heaven, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. This is where it all is. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And that was Asar, and come back here to do serious field educational work. So when someone tells you about the pyramids, you can really break it down. Break it down to our Father which art in heaven, thy kingdom come, thy will be done. Right here, this is where it started. That was taken from the Hermetic text of your ancestors long before the Ptolemies got the Jews to write the Bible, and the first European Bible was written right here in Egypt. And it was Ptolemy Philadelphus who got them to write for them, which they copied it from the pyramid text of our African ancestors. So now, can we validate this? Oh yes, we're going to validate this even further when we get inside of the museum in just a little while. And okay, brothers and sisters, as we talked about the pyramids and the capstone, this is a capstone of King Amenemhet, the third of the 12th dynastic period. These capstones were put on top of the pyramids. This capstone right here is from Hawawa. It's the capstone of Amenemhet III, as he was called Ni Ma'at Ra Amenemhet III, and that's his name here, Subek Ni Ma'at Ra, given life for eternity. And what you see here are the all-seeing eyes of Asar and Ra Harakte, or the wings representing the rising spirit, the Sahu spirit. Remember, Asar, who was the great king, as I said, in Orion's belt, represented Asar. He was what? Our Father, which art in heaven. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Where would we find the Orion at? Can we validate this? Can we validate with even a man by the name of Robert Bouvel, who many Egyptologists smashed down when he tried to say that Asar represented Orion's belt and Orion represented Sahu? That was the spiritual star for us to go to. Well, we can find it. Hold this for me. I want to show you something. Have patience here. This is very small. So where is this symbol at of Asar and Orion? Where is this symbol at? Well, let's go right over here and look closely. And what symbol do you see right here?
It's too much of the layer. The light.
What symbol do you see right there? You see Orion, you see Asar right there.
Right.
That validate that this capstone validates it on this capstone right here. Ni Ma'at Ra. This was of the 12th dynastic period. Over 4,000 years ago, this came from right here.
All right, so this should probably provide a little more context to what I'm saying. Okay, so kind of getting this idea of who are the Comedic people, because there's debates, right? Some will say that they're European. Some will say that Kemet or Egypt is not inside of Africa, hence the term sub-Saharan Africa. But the Comedics had a very keen understanding of who they were and who they were not, right? And if you look at image A, this is how the Comedic people seen themselves, right? Very black individuals. Image B is how they viewed what they call the Indo-European. C is how they viewed other blacks in Africa that were outside of Kemet. And then finally, D is the Semites, or the mixed people, right? So they knew very clearly who they were, and again, who they were not. Some images of Mali. That's the University of Senghar in Timbuktu. Again, kind of showing you this Mali empire. So these individuals are the Dogon Society, and they were produced out of this Mali region. What makes them famous is their ability to tap into the stars without any technology. They were credited for locating Sirius Star A and Sirius Star B with the naked eye, right? And modern science was not able to locate these stars. I could be wrong on the dates, but I want to say somewhere around the 1940s or the 1950s. Again, these Dogon societies were doing this way, way before. And again, this is without any type of technology to assist them. So when you think about the framework of African American male theory and the resistance, the resilience, the morality, the capacity for intelligence, this is all embodied in these individuals who we just covered in this brief lecture. So with the time remaining, I kind of want to get some feedback on what your thoughts were as far as the information you just received. You know, do you disagree? Jelani, you asked me, you're asking me, is that Dr. Ben? That's actual Ashwa Kwesi is who that was. Yeah, he's really, really dope. If you want to get any insight into like the Comedic origins of Christianity and Western civilization, Ashwa Kwesi is a great resource. I'll put his name in the chat for everyone. You can just YouTube him, and he has some really good information. Actually, he's out in LA quite a bit at the Karas Unity Center. If you're familiar with the South LA. All right, I'll put that in the chat for you. So yeah, I mean, I know it's a lot of information. I know it's, you're probably still processing it. But a good way to process is to converse, to dialogue, and engage in discourse. So what were your thoughts on what you just engaged?
I think the timeline is important, just knowing that this happened thousands of years before even what's called ancient history, because this is the ancients of the ancients. So, thousands of years before Greeks and Romans supposedly, invented medicine and math. So it's just mind-boggling, the scope of the years.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think you bring up a point too, in the sense that for Europeans, right, at that time, for you to be considered educated at all, you had to spend a minimum of 7 years in the Comedic mystery school system, right? So if you did 2 years, that's not considered enough, right? At minimum 7 years. And the way that these mystery schools were organized, So for now, we have freshmen, sophomores, juniors, seniors, right? And you go to enough classes and you pass those classes, then boom, you're able to move from freshman to sophomore. But that's not how the Comedic mystery schools worked, right? You had to be able to master a spiritual principle before you can move on to the next level. So for example, you would have to be able to meditate for X amount of hours and able to move from freshman to sophomore, right? You had to be able to understand the process of alchemy for you to be able to move from sophomore to junior. And to go from junior to senior, you had to learn how to use musical vibrations to heal the body. These are just some examples of the spiritual components that would be necessary for you to advance through what you call education, right? So I agree. And again, when you think at the times that these things were taking place, it makes you really question the notion of progress, right? Because one of the things that comes with modernity is progress and the removal and the advancement from the primitive to the modern, right? But if you kind of look at what they were doing and how the society was organized, who's more primitive? Other thoughts, comments, questions on what was received? Question for you. So I just presented you a history of who African people were. Now, let me reframe that. I presented you a history of who African people are, right? How do you reconcile that with how you are presented who Black people are today, right? So it's what you're receiving from, we'll say, media of who Black people are today and the information you just received on the history of African people. Speak to me about that tension or those contradictions. I know Jelani's good. I know Jen Lynn is good. I know Christian's good. I know Cassandra's good. I've heard a lot from Jelani. I heard from Christian. But the rest of y'all, you got to either wake up. I don't know what it is, but I'm going to need more engagement in this because I guarantee you the rest of our time together will be hella boring if this is how our dialogue will go. I also noticed the people who have been engaged, Jelani and Christian, their cameras are on, right? There's a direct correlation between people's ability to engage and their cameras being on. So Destiny, what are your thoughts? Yeah, I think you came in late, Destiny. So you might miss that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Hi. Well, my thoughts on the presentation of you just taught of the dialogue of the whole, the Egyptian. Am I getting it correct? Egyptian or European of how, for me it's very interesting of how it's formulating of how the generation goes by along and how we all communicate with a whole society.
Okay. I was looking at the chat, and then you're saying, Cassandra, descriptions of Black folks in media. We'll elaborate on that a little bit more for me.
I think I'm thinking of like movies and television shows. Like who are we giving the pen to? Like who's writing how Black folk look and act and talk, and how it's also accepted by the audience.
Yeah, you bring up a good point. Who is doing the writing, right? And the old adage goes, to the victors goes the spoils, right? So whoever wins the war could tell the story of how the war took place, right? And we know in this society, through the systems of colonialism, through the systems of enslavement, through the systems of savagery and vast inhumanity, the Europeans won the war, right? So they're able to tell the stories, right? This is why there's a large debate going on right now on whether we should tell critical race theories in school or not, because they want to continue to hold the pen to mitigate what stories are being told, right? So this information becomes imperative because what it forces you to do is to shift the way that you look at Black folks, right? It's hard to see just the thugs that are being promoted to you all the time, right? The lazy people that are being promoted to you all the time, the unintelligent people that are being promoted to you all the time. It's hard for you to accept that when you know that this is their history and their lineage. It's a contradiction. It doesn't coalesce with each other, right? So this information becomes important because it disturbs the ontological understanding of who Black folks are, right? This ties into why I say you cannot refer to Black folks as slaves in my class. How are you going to call Imhotep a slave? First multi-genius, right? How are you going to call Akhenaten a slave and just reduce his experience to that, right? So we have to be very critical and careful on how you perceive things and how you just accept information to be true without any critical engagement. What did you guys think about the role that women played in ancient Comedic society? And how could that be helpful for what's going on in our world today? Serena, what are your thoughts on the role of women in the
It
presentation?
seems like they had like a prominent role, like what you were saying about the women being depicted at the same size of as the men were. I know that in like African art, things like importance of different things are sometimes symbolized that way by, you know, not strictly literal, but having a more like symbolic meaning. But I don't think I've learned enough about women and enough about the role of women in Comedic society to say a whole lot about it yet.
Okay. We're going to get into that in the upcoming readings. We'll go into that a little bit more detail. But I mean, even from what you're saying, right, for them to kind of situate women and men as equal speaks to the way that they viewed women in that society. Faith, why don't you go ahead and state what you said in the chat?
Like unmute. You want me
Yeah.
to read it out loud? I only heard the end, but I think society paints a bad picture of Black people, but looking into history will contradict the stereotypes and what we are taught and pushed to believe of African Americans and their culture.
Yeah. And I think, right, well, what I was going to say is there's a difference between history with a capital H and then just regular H history. But I'll put it to you this way. What we learn in America, you don't learn history. You learn social science, right? And it's not about giving you accurate historical facts. It's about socializing you to be good Americans, right? And part of that socialization process is to view Black folks, African folks, as less than everybody else. That's part of being American. That's part of patriotism, right? These racial hierarchies get embodied into that. So if we are to learn history as faith articulates it, it's going to disturb that socialization process, right? We'll have one more comment and we'll close it out. I want to show you guys what to expect for next week and then answer any questions about the course for those who came in late. Somebody we have not heard from, let's close this out. So I know we have Kevin. I don't believe you heard from Emily. I don't believe you heard from Nathaniel, Israel, Yasmin. Is it Jose? I believe it's how you pronounce that. Ashlyn, we haven't heard from you. So if we have not heard from you, one of y'all close us out for the day.
I think that for the African women in the culture, I think they are just like as equal as men because they play like a crucial stability and successful in their families, and they also play like the important central role in our economy.
You know,
So that's what like, I got out of the presentation. It was kind of hard to understand at first because of like the language, how fast they were speaking. But as of like going on and how they change their generation, I think that's what I got out of the presentation.
okay, couple things. One, for everybody, it's just a general thing. If you feel like it's hard to keep up because I'm going too fast, just tell me to slow down. I can slow down, right? Two, one of the things that Emily said is talking about just the role of women, period, right? And for me, you think about mothers, and you think about all that goes into becoming a mother, right? I don't know how many of y'all have kids, but y'all have mothers, and you know, for those whose mothers was instrumental in your life, you know how fundamental they are, right? And when you think about that from a standpoint of leadership, right? Men have very large egos. The male ego is very fragile and is very grandiose. It's been over exaggerated. And those are two very poor characteristics for leadership. Again, the male ego is very fragile. The male ego is very grandiose. He has grand ideas about themselves, right? Those are two very poor characteristics as it pertains to leadership. When you think about women, you think about nurturers, right? The first teacher of the child is the mother, right? So these are characteristics that are innate within women that make them great leaders. And I think in the Western world, they have stifled themselves, known as the difference between we and they. They have stifled themselves because they foreclose the ability for women to be in leadership positions. When you talk about this idea of progress, how is it that the West is more progressive than what they would call the Orient or what they would call the East, right? How is it that they're more progressive when the West can't even get around the idea of women being on equal footing as men? We can't even figure out, or they can't even figure out how to pay women equally. But this is the more advanced society, right? So we have to really scale back and question these things that we just take for granted. All right, so we'll end there. I wanted to show you guys real quick where to access the readings for Monday. Monday, we will have our first fishbowl. We'll also do some breakout rooms like we did today. So the structure of the class will look like this. You guys will all log in. You know what, Nathaniel, I'm sorry. Why don't you go ahead and say what you're putting in the chat, man? Because actually this is really good, a really good point. So could you just close us out, Nathaniel? Oh, okay, I'm sorry, his mic isn't working. So what he was saying, they don't teach African American history. They only African American history they taught is about slavery or enslavement. They only teach European history, which is not right. Because of this, people don't know about all the things African people have accomplished. Absolutely true. So again, that not history is being taught, but socialization is being taught. So what Monday will look like? I'll have the room open by 1:30. I'll get the class started by 1:45. I'll give you guys about 10 minutes to get logged in. We'll go directly into our breakout rooms. That'll be about 10 minutes. We'll come back from the breakout rooms, discuss what was discussed in the breakout rooms. We'll go over my notes for what I pulled from the reading of importance. From there, you guys will do your fishbowl. So I'll choose 3 people at random. Again, you have 2 fishbowls per semester. You have 1 chance to pass on the fishbowl. All I'm looking for you to do is lead course conversation about anything you found of interest from the reading, whether you agreed, disagreed, or you can literally read from your journal, and that would be a sufficient fishbowl participation. Once we complete our fishbowl, everybody in the group has spoke in the fishbowl. Then we'll open up the conversation, the course, to everyone else in the course, and then that will bring us to the close of class. Okay. Let me share my screen. I'll pull up our Google Classroom site real quick, and I'll show you where to locate the readings for Monday. Now, I will make these. I'll email these out to you as well, right? But I just want to let you know where to locate them in case you want to start reading them now and not wait for the email. So under the classwork section, in weeks 1 through 3, tap on that, and the readings are going to be Hilliard, the teachings of Ptah. So these 2 PDFs. Now, I do want to point out, although there's 2 PDFs, you only need 1 journal entry, okay? The reason why there's 2 PDFs is I can only scan a certain amount of pages before it gets cut off. So think of these 2 PDFs as 1 reading, okay? So you only have to make 1 journal entry for these 2 texts. So for Monday, we'll be reading Hilliard, the teaching of Ptah. Make sure you read part 1 and part 2, okay? Is there any other questions, comments, concerns about the material discussed or just about the class as a whole? Especially for those who came in a little late.
I actually have a question
Yeah.
about, so I was just remembering, like in high school, I read something called Things Fall Apart, and it was about like Okonkwo and things. And I remember there was like still like a power dynamic between the man and the woman, and how Okonkwo had like multiple wives and he would beat them and things like that. So that would be like different in relation to the other things we've talked about today.
So it's you have the timelines become important, right? So and things fall apart. It's the tension at play is the European invasion, right? The missionaries coming into play, right? So at this point, Europe is already invaded Africa. They already started to influence the way that Africans relate to one another, right? This lecture is really centered on what African people were doing prior to European invasion, right? So once you start to see the Europeans invade, you start to see patriarchy start to peek its head in the African relations, right? Yes, there may be multiple wives, right? That was a thing, but that's all good, Cassandra. Enjoy. There may be multiple wives, but far as beating women and things like that, that was not a thing. In fact, to become a man in West African culture, pre-colonial West African culture, there was 4 components: rites of passage, demonstration of adolescent, of physical prowess at adolescence, right? So the ability to wrestle and things like that. Give me 1 second, Jasmine, I got you. Husbandhood, so getting a wife, and fatherhood, right? So under this component of husbandhood, right, there's this proverb that says, courage should be shown in the battlefield, not the household, right? I'll say that one more time. Courage should be shown in the battlefield, not the household. So, and if a man does in fact strike his wife, the way that the law was designed, if that wife had brothers, fathers, uncles, any men in their life, they are by law to go into that house, snatch that man out that house, and whoop his ass, right? That's the way that they made sure that things like that didn't take place. And these are all things that were being done prior to European contact. The fishbowl. Yeah, go. If you guys have to go, feel free. For the fishbowl question, the fishbowl question. So what the fishbowl is, everyone has 2 chances to fishbowl. You have to do it twice. All I'm asking for you to do is to lead class conversation. You'll talk about the reading, anything that you found of interest, anything that you may have even been confused about. You could use that to start the discussion. You have 1 time to pass in the fishbowl, right? So if you're not prepared, you say, you know what, professor, I'm not prepared. I'm like, all right, bet, no worries. But next time I call on you, you have to fishbowl because at that point, you already used your pass. You can literally use your journal entry for your fishbowl. That'll be perfectly fine. Any other question? Kevin, you gone? Yeah, give me 1 second. Kevin, on your syllabus, it has the code to the Google Classroom site. Does that answer your question, Kevin? Any other questions about the lecture, about the course?
Just to make sure, the fishbowl is on Monday, right?
The first fishbowl will be Monday, and we'll be doing a fishbowl
so like
every class.
So like we make a journal entry then for the reading?
So yes, so when you read, you know you want to do your journal entry, right? So every time that you read, you know you want to submit to your journal. Any other questions? This login for Zoom will be the same login that we'll be using for the entire semester. Because I teach courses, I have literally 3 courses back to back to back, right? I will be sending out in the morning to you guys the Zoom login information. So it's probably around 10 o'clock in the morning. It will be the same exact login information that you use this time, but I send those out before every class so you have quick access to it. But because I have 3 classes in a row, I won't be sending it like 1 o'clock for you guys. I'll be sending it like early in the morning, 10 o'clock. Also, with that being said, if you need to contact me, it's best to do so by 10:30 in the morning because from 10:40 to our class starting, I'm lecturing. So it's going to be hard for me to kind of respond. And you see how I'm trying to respond and be in class, it makes it very difficult. And it kind of sucks for y'all because it's pulling my attention away from you. So if you can, please email me before 10:30 or after 3, and I'll be more than happy to respond. Any other questions, comments, or concerns? All right. Well, thank you guys for your patience. We should be a lot more fluid on Monday, and then we'll get how things operate Monday will be like the flow for the remainder of the semester. This will be the last lecture I'll do. All right, you guys. Be